So welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. This is where we explore the new game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance, resourcefulness, and well-being in the workplace. Join us if you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business. Join us if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber. And join us if you want to be part of the new revolution in understanding how the mind works and recognize that we are more than just our psychology and that can lead to better results.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. And today we have a special episode, and it's a special episode because I'm interviewing someone, but unlike the normal interviews where I might interview previous client or a fellow practitioner in this. This time we've got a special treat because I put a request out to my network to say, are there people out there who are interested in this understanding of quality of mind, have got a little bit of interest and resonate with it, but still have some questions that they'd like to ask? Because I thought it might be useful for other people to hear what someone's curiosity is bringing up for them. So, very luckily, Laurence Hollobon has decided to join us and come on this podcast to share some of her questions about his understanding, and hopefully that will be interesting for everyone. So, thank you so much and welcome, Laurence.
Good morning, Piers. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So, thank you so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to it. And before we get into your questions, could you just give listeners just a couple of minutes about who you are, your background, and how come we're talking, I guess?
Yeah, sure. Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Really, really pleased to be with you this morning. So as you can probably hear, I am French. So my name is Laurence, which creates a little bit of confusion sometimes where people in the UK expect somebody, male turning up in the room. So, but that's me, fortunately. So I am French. I live in London. I've got two daughters. My husband's British, which creates a lot of discussions about, cultural differences most times. Quite interesting. So I have a career actually in consulting and HR. So I've been in consulting in the beginning I worked in France and then moved to Germany and Switzerland where I worked for quite a few years. Back to France, and then I moved to the corporate world when I was back in Paris about 10 years ago. And corporate world meaning for me becoming an HR manager and HR director. And I actually spent the last, 8 years now with a company called Bell, who is in the snacking and cheese industry. Not quite surprising for a French person. And I had the chance to live in several countries. So I stayed in France for a while, but then I moved to the Middle East, where we spent with my family a couple of years, and we also actually came back. We came back about 2 years ago to London, and since then we've been working there and now working in consulting and coaching. Great,
well, really interesting background, going around the world and doing lots of different things, I guess, but always around sort of people and HR. That sounds like the sort of the continuity in what you've been doing, Laurence. Okay.
Yes, that's what I guess I was trying to reflect on. What is it that makes me do this job? HR is can be quite an ungrateful profession sometimes. And I think it's the fact that I truly believe that there's a way to grow your business and grow your people at the same time. You don't have to choose. You don't have to go for one, and look for finance results only, or to go for the people and be a so-called people person. You can actually, in an organization, if you're a manager, if you're HR, if you're pretty much anyone, there's always a way to make sure everything works well together, and combined, you can actually create some very interesting virtuous circles, I would say.
It's such a good point, and I think that would underpin sort of how I would see it, in that actually your people are your greatest asset, and you don't have to compromise on their well-being and fulfillment for commercial results. Actually, if you get the one right, the other one comes. So absolutely. So very interesting background. And so just to give listeners a bit of context, but correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I'm right in saying that you came across started to hear a few podcasts and read a couple of posts about quality of mind a few months ago. Where we got a sort of a mutual colleague, I think, that introduced you, and then we met at an event. and I sort of probably spoke about it for 3 or 4 minutes. And then you started to listen and read a few things about quality of mind in the last few months. Is that sort of the extent of your knowledge so far?
No, you're totally correct. I mean, I was curious in the beginning because the first discussion you and I had, I remember, were about the fact that there's a way to look at things differently. You can become, I mean, in my profession as HR, as a coach, as I am sometimes with the teams I work with, I realize that the potential that we have sometimes remains a bit locked in for plenty of reasons, as an individual or as a team. And what you were telling me at that stage was, well, there's a way to unlock that. And if you start looking at things in a different way, things become easier. So I got interested. I wasn't sure if I was understanding the concepts very well. And I started to listen, to podcasts that you shared with me or videos. And from one thing to the other, it's starting to build up. And I'm not saying that I understand, in detail, but I do have a lot of questions actually, because I sense there's something, and I can't really grasp precisely what it is, and putting the right words and concepts to explain is something I'd love to be able to do, because I do believe there's something more than what we see. Nowadays in the organizations we live in, we feel that things are finite or confined, or there's, A or B as solutions. And usually there's something else that you can imagine. And I think what you're saying relates to that. So there's this kind of sphere that I'm very interested in exploring.
Okay, well, let's find out what some of those questions are, and I'm sure they're probably ones that other people have too. So just fire away with what questions, and it might be a bit higgledy-piggledy in how we do this, but that's fine. I'll try and contextualize it and make it useful for listeners. But so what sort of strikes you as something you'd like to know a little bit more about or understand?
I'd be interested to for you to explain more in detail what are the key elements. Very simply, the 2 or 3 concepts behind the quality of mind.
Yeah. Now, I'll caveat this by saying it's a hard thing to give a gist of, because there's the words we use are only signposting to something deeper. But let me try and give a little nutshell. So, at the impact end, the role and relevance of quality of mind is that it increases anyone's individually or collectively ability to have more resourcefulness, performance, well-being. So it does the holy trinity of those 3. And the way it's doing that, of course, that's turning up behaviorally in action and psychologically for people. But that's not where we're leveraging. That's not where we're looking at. We're actually looking to get people to explore something that is not normally conventionally talked about, which is how does a human being experience and create reality? What is it that is sourcing that? Not what is our reality, as in what is our content, what is our thought, what is our behavior. We don't look there. We also don't look at who I am as a person, myself, my personality, my character, my upbringing, my values, my beliefs. We don't look there. We go more upstream and look at how does consciousness and thought and the mechanism that we would call a brain work. And actually we're going even pre-brain to something that is sourcing everything that you might call sort of overall awareness or consciousness. And we're helping people to see that a lot of the things that we've been conditioned to believe about where our experience and reality comes from, which is usually, science over the last 300 years has told us that the outside world of time, space, and matter is causal to us. And we're sort of interpreting our experience of that. Now, what we're getting people to explore is whether that's true or not. And where we end up is to see, well, actually, there's no direct causal power in the outside world, in events or circumstances. It's not me creating my reality through my mind. There's something else that's sort of sourcing all of that at a more, if you like, to use the word, spiritual or infinite level. And once people start to have a look, they can see that. And then what we talk about is, well, how does that turn up psychologically? What does that mean for when I'm in a difficult meeting with my boss? What does that mean when I'm trying to work out how to devise my new strategy, or when I'm dealing with anxiety or stress? So we go really sort of upstream to explore something very foundational, which turns on its head conventional wisdom about what we are psychologically. Now, I don't know whether that helps at all, or it might pose more questions.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a few keywords here that I'd like to explore. You talked about the brain, how the brain works, and that could be something that would be fundamental in explaining maybe how we behave and how things could be different. That's what I understand from what you've just said. So could you then dig in a little bit more and say to us now, what is it that the brain does? Or at least, what is it that the brain does that we thought we knew over the past, you said 200 or 300 years?
So I was always brought up that the brain has, is full of neural pathways and is the center, the epicenter of our human experience, right? So it all comes from the brain, right? So there's neurons and thingies in the brain, and that's creating our reality. And the brain's like a big kind of computer or library, and it's all going on from the brain, caused by the brain. Now, what I would say is, no, I don't think that. I now think the brain is involved at one level as a kind of processor, maybe, because if you, for example, put a big electromagnet next to one hemisphere of our brain, you can drain color out of what you see, right? So we know the brain is involved, but it's not the source. Right. And if you look into a little bit about what neuroscience has been looking at, they've been trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness, which is, what causes our experience. And they can find lots of what they call neurocorrelates, things that correlate brain activity with human experience, but nothing that causes it. Right. So what we're therefore saying is the cause of our human reality and our what we are is before brain. Mm-hmm. Right. So brain is like a processor, but it's not the start point. Mm-hmm. And if the brain gets damaged, then you'll see differences in perception. Right. Just like if you drink a bottle of vodka or have some LSD, right, or whatever it is, you can change our perception, but only as weirdly as in a dream. Right. So what we're pointing people to see is actually, yes, the brain's involved, but it's not causal. Mm-hmm. Which then makes the question, well, what is causal, right? Which is a bigger question. But knowing it's not the brain and the body are not what we think they are brings a lot of psychological freedom.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is if the brain is involved, but is not the source, if we just drill it down to something quite simple, which is the everyday, activities we have, the interactions we have, the work we do, the conflicts we may face with people, etc. What is it that we need to know to make these things work better? I mean, we're not talking about cause at the moment. Maybe we get to that later in the discussion. But at the moment, very practically, I had that meeting with my manager last week. It went really wrongly. We disagreed. I left the room thinking, gosh, I can't work with that person anymore. I would like to leave, but I can't. I'm stuck because I've got contingencies of, financial commitments and everything. And I feel stressed since that time. How does the quality of mind approach that you're suggesting help me deal with that situation?
Well, great question. So one of the core kind of implications we talk about, and this is a phrase to get behind and not get literally caught on the words, is that any experience we're having is what we would say real but not true. Okay, so what do we mean by real and what do we mean by true? Again, the words don't matter. You could sort them if you wanted. But what we mean is that the human experience that we're in feels and looks real. So that meeting with the person doing what they're doing is your reality, right? And it feels and looks real. You're not pretending. You're not making it up. But if we see insightfully at a realized level that it's not true, we then don't take it literally and we see that it is just a moment-to-moment creation of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And it's not a fixed thing that we then need to make lots of meaning about, that we need to manage or control or judge or justify. And instead, we have more flow. Mm-hmm. So we'll have that meeting. Actually, our feelings that you mentioned, let's say the meeting didn't feel very good, it was a horrible feeling. Actually, our sensations are intelligent feedback to tell us where our aperture is to the wider infinite resourcefulness that we all are. And when something is feeling difficult and icky and, oh, I don't like this, and you feel insecure or anxious, that's actually information nudging our system to have a wider aperture on the situation. Yet, innocently, invisibly, we've been conditioned to think that feeling is telling us, oh, buy into what's coming through the mind at the moment. Right? So then we find more justification and desire to cope and manage because we think the icky feeling is saying, right, well, this is a really bad situation. I need to do something about this. Actually, no, it's telling us, back off your human experience right now. The desktop user interface of your mind is not very accurate. Right? So instead, we can see that it may feel real for us, but it's not true.
Okay. I think that I understand what you're saying. It relates to a lot of experiences we have. I mean, in the corporate world, as a person, in our social interactions and everything, stepping back and trying to let go of what happened and getting out of either our thoughts or emotions or both usually helps. We can see this. If there's a theory saying that if you give it a few minutes or seconds when you're angry, then it actually gets better and you lose the anger. So I guess that relates to that, what you're saying. However, the true thing is something I'm not sure if I understand. When you say it's real, I agree. I've been faced as an HR, person. Obviously, you meet with people who give you their version of a story, and it's real. And then you meet their counterparts, who they've had a problem with in the organization, and they tell you something totally different. And it's real as well, though. Both are actually telling you very different stories, but it does feel real to them, and you have to acknowledge that if you want to get into a form of communication with them, with each of them, and then resolve potentially the situation. But what about, the true refers, because if you tell somebody who's a CFO, I've worked with a lot of CFOs, they're my buddies, we don't always get on every topic, but they are quite structured and rational. If you tell them something is true or not true, or true doesn't exist, they will look at you and say, well, guy, thanks, but I don't buy into that. My figure is true, my calculation is true, everything's true. So could you explain maybe a little bit more in detail what you mean by true, so that we can understand more about this theory of real but not true?
Yeah, and it's it's one we went on our programs. We spend a lot of time talking about because it's such a core implication. And you're right, and it can sound like, what do you mean it's not true? So what we're pointing to at the level of human experience, and I'll come into what it might look like in the workplace. But at the level of human experience, what we're saying is there is no objective truth to the world or reality. Okay, so what we're saying is there isn't something out there which is objectively true, like a tree or a car or a person, right? They don't exist objectively. They are a rendering of consciousness at an individual level, right? It points back to what quantum physics is trying to see between particles and waves changing when they're observed, right? So there is no objective truth, right? Now, anything we're experiencing feels and looks real, and that can happen for individuals very separately. So that's why you'll have two people who can watch a movie and have very different views about the movie, or an HR scenario, two people will have very different realities on it, right? Both of their realities are real to them. There isn't one that's more true than the other. There might be in the construct of an organizational setup where there is one that fits more with what the organization's on about, right? So in the game of that organization, like if you're playing a board game with your kids, there's rules, and you can say, well, that's nearer the rules than the other one. But what we're saying is at the level of human experience, there isn't one that's right and one that's wrong, because there is no true, because the reality that's out there that is true doesn't exist in time, space, and matter. I don't want to get too complicated on this, but whatever is objective reality is not time, space, and matter. It's something we don't know about, right? And time, space, and matter is our rendering of that, our desktop UI. So when we say something isn't true, we're not denying that someone has a reality that looks true to them. What we're saying is that nothing can possibly be true, right? And the easiest way to see this at a practical level, right? I'll give you 3 little examples, right? So there's times when we're in our experience and it looks absolutely real and true. You're caught up in something. It feels very powerful. It feels like you have to fix it or change it or deal with it or cope with it. And there's no wiggle room. It is what it is. And if you try and tell someone, hey, don't worry, it'll look different tomorrow, they're like, no, it won't. Right? There's other times when we are in our reality, we kind of know we've got unhelpful thoughts and the world's not looking great, but we sort of are slightly spotted. Maybe it might look different tomorrow, or maybe there's another way of seeing this. So we're kind of half onto it, right? But we can't help ourselves from getting caught up, right? And then there's other times when we would really spot that our reality is real but not true. And the main one we'll do that is when we're just waking up from a dream in the morning, right? So there might be the odd time when you first open your eyes, you're 10, 20 seconds into the morning and you're still caught in that dream and it feels real because your heart's going and whatever. But your system knows it's not a dream, it's a dream, and it very quickly disappears. And when it disappears, the reality changes. Now, in that one, you never said it was true, right?
Yes.
You would say it was real because I'm not caught up. Or little kiddies, when they're upset, that they get upset, we would take them, we would acknowledge their reality, but we wouldn't think it was true. So that they're pretending they are a princess. We're like, oh, brilliant. We don't think, oh, they really are a princess. Okay. So we can see it sometimes, right? But other times we can't see it at all. Now, what we're saying is it's always not true. We just can't always see it. And it depends on our aperture.
Okay.
And what we call our aperture to our consciousness, to quality of mind, we call it aperture, which is how contracted or expanded is consciousness for us. And can we see the real and not true nature of our reality in any moment?
Okay.
Now, does that help at all?
Yes, it does make sense. I understand better what you mean by not true. And I think probably we need to regardless of the definition or whatever, whenever we want to get into a conversation with someone and try to help them open or increase their aperture, maybe those examples are really helpful, because I never thought about the dream thing, but yes, it does feel so vivid and real that it's your reality. And on the other hand, your mind knows it's not true. So yes, I can see that both can coexist. And I think this is where we need to get, the people to, the fact that, you can experience something, but it doesn't mean it is the truth for yourself or for anyone else. And that's okay. We can live with this. And if we can get people to this, we can live with this status. I guess it's the beginning of the aperture concept of how do you make it bigger so that things can be managed actually with more means or in an easier way. So I understand what you're saying. Now, the next question I would have would be, how do you make sure that people are actually open to that, or have get a larger aperture to manage situations in a more, in a calmer way, more relaxed way? I think the state we all try to reach, right? Feeling a little bit in that meeting that I was mentioning, that could have happened last week with a manager. How could have ended up differently, and how could, I have not lost sleep over it, for example? Is there a way to get there?
Well, there are many, many ways, right? Now, the quality of mind is pointing to a particular way, but just to give you the context. So, for the first 10 years of my career, before I got into doing quality of mind work, I was doing NLP, positive psychology, hypnosis, EFT, clean light, all sorts of tools and techniques to help people, if you like, have a wider aperture. The language we're using now is of a wider aperture, right? And there are lots of psychological strategies, tools and techniques, which can have some effect, right? Of course they can, because the system is designed to open and ebbs and flows. And they had some effect, but it was fairly temporary, right? And you had to do them, right? Now, what we're pointing to now is that actually a lot of those attempts to make ourselves in a higher aperture to get perspective, mindfulness, meditation, whatever it is, are actually, funnily enough, getting in the way of the system or the ebb and flow of that aperture anyway, because whenever you add personal thought in to the system, it kind of clogs up the aperture in a way. That's a metaphor, of course, right? Now, when people explore the principles behind quality of mind at a realized level, they start to see the obviousness of how the system works. And that dissolves some of the conditioned programmed mind that has this desire to add lots of personal conceptual thought in, right? Which is what gets in the way. Because if we believe, wholeheartedly that the world is real and true, then of course we're going to have to be psychologically alert to manage that world, which is going to add conceptual thought in, which is going to stop the aperture from opening for us to seeing fresh. Which is why people find it easier to see a wide perspective on things they don't really care about. So, like your friends will be telling you about something or a colleague, and you can go, hey, well, here's an idea, here's this, and you can see all sorts of resourcefulness and possibility in a situation that isn't yours, right? Because you don't have so much thinking invested in that. So what we're pointing people to see is the nature of how the mind functions, right? And that, yes, we have this personal conceptual mind with all our programming and conditioning, and we're not getting rid of that at all. We're just getting that to ebb and flow more easily, so it dissolves out the way, which allows this wider aperture to come through. But we're not doing that through tool, technique, or psychological strategy, which is a lot of what we used to do, right? Mm-hmm. We're actually pointing people to see the nature of the system for itself. When they have realizations about that, a lot of that conceptual personal thinking kind of dissolves, and they find it easier for that aperture to open by itself, because it always was anyway. But it's not caught up with all the unhelpful, invisibly, innocently unhelpful programming and conditioning that we have. So there are tactical ways you can do it through kind of tools and techniques, but what we're pointing to is something more foundational and fundamental than that.
Okay. What is the typical, I would say, example in the people you've come across or that you've coached or supported between before and after? I mean, have you got an example of that to share with us?
Yeah, and there are many, and on the other podcasts, with the clients, they all come and tell you about that for themselves. But I'll give you the nutshell. So what people find is, and they describe it in different ways, but they have, I guess, a different felt experience of the world, which often turns up in more flow, more spaciousness in the mind, more bandwidth. Which then has big implications for their ability to get clear, to see fresh possibility, to listen deeply to others and understand where people are coming from, to feel connected, to have new possible thoughts that they didn't have before, to feel more resilient, so they're more discouragement proof, so they don't need the outside world to be a certain way in order to feel okay. They drop a lot of old narratives about themselves, so the old stories, well, I'm this, I'm that kind of dissolves. They feel more future-proof, if that makes sense. And they just have a kind of, someone the other day described it as a lingering sense of calm, which means their ability to be in the world and operate increases, because they have more bandwidth, more resourcefulness, and they get more done with less effort. So they're sailing, not rowing.
Okay. Yeah, less effort. I can hear that in what you're saying. I mean, it sounds like when you go through this, if you feel it, see it, get it, I don't know how to describe it, then it changes things for good. I mean, it seems to be that the traditional approach would help you a little bit, help you fix your anger, your frustration, your stress, but then it may come back because you're actually fixing it, like putting a plaster or taking some medicine to sort it out. What you're describing, it sounds like there's there's a way to not have to take any medication anymore, because if you start looking at things in a different way, things, these problems disappear. Is that right? Or is it just a...
Yeah, no, that is right. So a lot of us are innocently doing things to help us cope and manage, whether that's drinking or drugs or eating or meditation or yoga or whatever, and we're all coping the best we can. And what people find with this is they need to do less of that. Now, we're not saying you then become some utopian, always positive person, because that's just not the human system. We're designed to have a full range of experiences. But what you find is, it's a bit weird this, you become okay with not being okay, right? So when you are caught up, it's more temporary. So you're more like a 4-year-old, really. You get annoyed with something, it's temporary, and it doesn't grip you and it doesn't dwell with you, right? So you get annoyed, boom, and then you're kind of done, right? So you then get to enjoy the lows and the highs, because the lows have less causal power, they don't hang around so long, but you get a fuller, richer appreciation of what it is to be a human. And then that means you're kind of, at the same time, this will sound paradoxical, you're more yourself and less yourself. If that makes sense. So, and then the need to do things to fix yourself. So we've had quite a few people that used to meditate, and then they come on the program and they don't meditate anymore, right? Now, we're not banning meditation, do what you like, but people don't feel the need, because before they were using it as a bit of a crutch. They don't need the crutches anymore.
Yes, I see. Now I can relate to what you're saying in terms that earlier when we started the conversation, you were mentioning how the brain works, and the brain is actually projecting, information, or at least use its own reference system to understand reality. And what you're saying is, because there's more than that, and there may be other frameworks, or there would be no framework, or there's more to life than what we see, and we probably see it based on the lenses we're wearing. So when I wake up and it's a good day, even and then you were talking about the dreams earlier, it happens that I wake up thinking, wow, I'm in a mood that is just unbelievable today, and that day usually goes in an amazing way. I mean, great things happen and things flow and everything. Next day can be totally different. So I understand what you're saying in terms that the way we perceive things probably will affect our experience. And my other takeaway from what you said today is there are resources to tap into to go and get something that is actually more appropriate or makes our lives better. We're not conditioned only. We shouldn't be conditioned only by our thoughts or emotions, because they can be changed and they're not necessarily true, right?
Yeah. So to your 2 points. So absolutely, what we experience in any moment is only ever, the mind. I don't mean brain, we mean mind, right? It's only ever that's it. That's all we've got. I mean, no one's ever experienced anything outside of awareness, right? So impossible to say I've had an experience that hasn't come through awareness, right? You can't have that, right? So the only thing we actually have 100% knowing of is the fact of awareness, right? So everything else is after that. So it's always, 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 always the mind. To your point that we know we have more than just our conditioned self. Absolutely. So when we're in a low aperture, if you like, a contracted form of activity of consciousness, it looks like we just are our past. We just are our conditioned thinking, and that's all we've got. Now, in any moment that aperture opens a bit, we see that we're not that. We see that we are infinite. Now, that sounds a bit trite, but to give you a more practical experience of that, there'll be times when you're walking down the street or walking in the park, and you just see a tree, and you're just like, that is a cool tree, right? And that's a tree you've walked past 20 times or 2,000 times. Or you look at your child, or you look at someone and you just see beauty in them that you didn't notice before. And just these tiny little moments, right? It could be even having a cup of coffee and you just have a moment of connection of something, sense that there's something more than just me in this universe, and this universe is me, and I am me, and the universe is me, and all that. We tend to get fleeting glances of that, but we totally disregard them, right? As not useful, indulgent, and now I've got to get back to work and be rah, 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 right? But there are not many humans out there that haven't had glimpses of that. They may have forgotten them. Kids are having them all the time, right? Okay. And usually about the age of 7 or 8, they articulate them to us, and we just go, yeah, don't worry, because they start asking really amazing questions, 7 or 8-year-old kids, about what they are spiritually, and we just ignore it. And then school tells them to learn their homework. So we've over-indexed, emphasized the conditional mind, right, the conceptual mind, and we've forgotten what we truly have access to, which is infinite. And occasionally we see amazing things happening in the world, with people doing amazing things, where they're pushing the boundaries of what they should be able to do, physically or mentally. And we're like, or even when they die and then come back and they experience it, we kind of don't regard that as anything to look at. But when you start looking at what it is that we truly are, it starts to loosen everything else at a day-to-day basis. And we realize what you've just said, we are more than our conditioning and programming. And that's available to every single one of us, regardless to what we are.
Okay. Maybe one last thing I would be interested in knowing, but it's a vast topic, I guess, is how could we apply that in the corporate world? Knowing that, I've been in this world for a long time. I've seen people thrive in it or suffer a lot in it. Nowadays, with the uncertainty that you see everywhere, I think it's quite stressful for leaders, for employees, for everyone in organization, because nobody knows what's going to happen on many fronts. Is there something that this approach that you're really trying to push forward and to help people? How is that something that could do for corporations really?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it nowadays, we've got more VUCA, more volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity. We've got a rise of presenteeism, workplace mental health in question, blah, 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 blah. We've got millennials who want, purpose-driven, we've got lots of dynamics going on, right? The world's very fast changing, with technology. We've got AI coming in, all these things. Now, for me, of course I'm biased, this understanding is exactly what we need now to make ourselves more agile, nimble, to have a deeper appreciation of what we truly are, to help us navigate the exponential level of change that's going on. Because at the moment, what we're trying to do, to use the metaphor, is we're trying to row through it using our psychological strategies, using our willpower, our conditioned self, and it's not really fit for purpose anymore. Right? It's kind of creaking at the seams. Now, what we're saying is, hey, there's another way, right? There's another thing to access. Now, it's not something you've been using. You've been accessing it all through your life. Of course you are, because you're human, but it's not what you've been taught to rely on, right? Because it's not as tangible or as controllable as the conceptual mind of willpower and discipline and the rowing way. Right? So you're going to have to let go a bit. You're going to need some intellectual humility. You're going to need to explore beyond the tangible, which might sound a little woo-woo to start with, to use that phrase. But once you tap into it and wake it back up again, because most of us have numbed ourselves to it through the overemphasis on the conceptual mind, through our education system, through the way we've rewarded ourselves, it will come and help you out. Right? And that's for anyone and everyone. Anyone in an organization can benefit, but it really helps if it starts with the leadership. Mm-hmm. And from the organizations that we've talked to, they see the value for this being embedded in their culture. It gives them a foundation of fertility, openness, and all those attributes of resourcefulness, well-being, performance, creativity, discouragement-proof resilience, connection with their customers, suppliers, clients, goes up. Right? So it's like when the water in the harbor goes up, all the boats rise. So to me, it's something that should be instilled in any organizational culture. Now, luckily, very slowly but surely, I've got colleagues doing this in schools, and it will be get embedded in at a young age. Like we educate kids on hygiene, right? Yeah. It will become part of what we are at a young age. But at the moment, that's not there. So it's available to any organization. And to start with, for an organization, it will be a competitive differentiator. And we've got clients that say that because this is what helps them get more out of their people, which, as we said right at the beginning of the conversation, can unlock commercial success and people's well-being and resourcefulness. So there's no payoff. It's a win-win.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. So interesting. I think we've gone through a few of my questions this morning.
Well, I think your questions were excellent. I think they're good. Could we do them justice in a 5-minute answer? Who knows? But the idea, as I always say on these podcasts, is for people to have a listen, press pause on what they know, or press pause on what they know, have a listen. And then if they resonate with something, they get a little curious, is to then try and find out more. So you're probably going to leave this podcast maybe with more questions than you came in, who knows? But if that's resonating with you and there's a curiosity, then listen to some others, read some of the things we've got, message us. We recognize this is not something you can get in the gist. But if something resonates and you're curious to know, well, is there another way? Then find out more. So these are teasers, tasters, these podcasts. And I love being interviewed by you, Laurence. We could do a part 2 of this. I thought I was really enjoying your questions. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope people have found it useful. And until then, until we hear your questions or till next time, hope everyone has fun being curious. So a big, big thank you, Laurence. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you very much, Piers. Really interesting for me. And yes, I'm even more curious than when we started. So.
Oh, good. Excellent. Okay, everyone. So until next time, have fun being curious.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please reach out and leave us a review and a comment. If you want more info, check out makingchangework.co.uk or Piers Thurston on LinkedIn.